Azaria Vance sat by the wide window of their luxurious apartment in the Aurora Heights complex on King Drive, watching the relentless March wind whip snow into chaotic swirls around the glowing streetlights. Welcome to my channel, Voice Auntie Anne's. I share new life stories here every day, and I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe and liked my video. Now let's jump back into my story. I'm sure you'll love it if you keep listening till the end. Chicago in late winter was a study in monochrome. The heavy, leaden sky bled into the whitish, slush-covered ground, and the tall buildings rose like jagged black teeth against the endless gray. A city bus rumbled past below, sending a wave of dirty slush splashing onto the curb. A group of construction workers huddled at the bus stop cursed loudly, shaking off their heavy Carhartt jackets as the cold spray hit them. Azaria pulled the soft, knitted throw blanket tighter around her knees, an old habit of bundling up for comfort, even though the apartment was always perfectly heated. She took a slow sip of tea from the mug Darius had given her for their last anniversary. The gold lettering on it read, "Best Wife," though the edges were already starting to peel and fade. The tea had gone cold long ago, but she barely noticed. "Aria, baby, where'd you disappear to?" Darius's warm, familiar voice drifted in from the kitchen, accompanied by the rich smell of frying onions and turkey sausage. "I'm making scrambled eggs. You want some? Or are you still on that keto kick?" "I'll have some," she called back softly, without turning her head from the window. From the outside, their life looked flawless, like one of those polished spreads in Essence magazine. A spacious 3-bedroom condo in a high-rise with sleek designer renovations. A mortgage paid off 3 years ahead of schedule. A refrigerator always stocked with gourmet treats from Whole Foods and Trader Joe's. Darius was a senior project manager at Midwest Energy Solutions, pulling in $15,000 month after taxes, an income that felt almost aristocratic in their social circle. After they married, Azaria had happily left her demanding job as a nurse practitioner at Cook County Hospital. The endless night shifts, the difficult patients, the constant smell of bleach and illness, it had all worn her down. "Why keep torturing yourself, Aria?" Darius had said gently, wrapping his arms around her shoulders. "I'm the man. I provide for my family." And he did. No one could deny that. He provided generously, thoughtfully, consistently. But in 7 years of marriage, one stubborn splinter had remained lodged deep in Azaria's heart, aching quietly and refusing to heal. It was Darius's mother's house in Cedar Grove, a small town about an hour outside. Chicago, a place where Azaria's path was strictly forbidden. "That Miss Clementine called again," Darius said a few minutes later, setting a steaming plate of fluffy, scrambled eggs and savory turkey sausage in front of her. At the dining table, Mama's neighbor. "She keeps asking when we're finally coming to visit." I told her the usual. "Once the renovations are finished, you're all welcome." Azaria looked up at him, her tired eyes meeting his calm, handsome face. It was the same rehearsed answer she'd heard for years, delivered smoothly, like lines from a script he'd memorized long ago. "Darius, honey," she said quietly, "how long can we keep patching and rebuilding that poor house? Let's just go once. Let me see how things are coming along. Maybe I can help with something." His face tightened, just a fraction. To anyone else, it would have been invisible. But after 7 years of living together, Azaria had learned to read those tiny micro-expressions, those fleeting alarm bells that flashed across his features before he smoothed them away. "Zari, we've talked about this 100 times," he replied, his tone patient but firm. "The place is completely torn up right now. We're replacing rotten beams, the floors are ripped out, the roof leaks in 6 places. There's dust and mud everywhere, cheap contractors banging around from dawn to dusk. What would you even want to see there?" "I want to see your mother," Azaria said softly, setting down her fork. The eggs suddenly looked unappetizing. In 7 years, Azaria had met Odessa Mae Vance only a handful of times, 5 to be exact. She could count them on one hand, twice at the very beginning, when Darius was still courting her, and Odessa had come into the city for medical checkups at the university hospital, and once, in the first year of their marriage, when the newlyweds had driven out to Cedar Grove for Memorial Day weekend. Since then, nothing. Not for love, not for money, not for any occasion. In Azaria's memory, Odessa remained a quiet, gentle woman with kind brown eyes that carried a quiet, unexplained sorrow. At their first meeting, when Darius introduced them, his mother had pulled Azaria into an unexpected warm hug and gently stroked her back. "You take good care of my Darius, baby girl," Odessa had whispered. "He's a good man, just been very lonely." That simple maternal gesture, the palm sliding slowly across her back, had etched itself permanently into Azaria's heart. She had longed to know this woman better, to build a real relationship, to become, if not a daughter by blood, then at least a daughter in spirit. But the door to Odessa's world had been firmly, inexplicably closed. "Mama hasn't been feeling well lately," Darius said now, sitting across from her and spreading yolk across his cornbread. "Her heart's acting up. Blood pressure swings wildly. I take her to the county clinic every month, buy all the expensive medications. Don't worry, baby. I've got everything under control. Can I at least call her?" Azaria asked. "Hear her voice? Say hello?" "Her phone's broken," he answered quickly, too quickly. "I've told you this a dozen times. Reception out there is terrible. You only get a signal if you stand pressed against the second-floor window. Next time I go, I'll buy her a simple flip phone." Azaria picked at her eggs in silence. They tasted rubbery, flavorless. 2 years earlier, Odessa's number had stopped ringing altogether, just endless beeps into the void. And before that, there had been those strange, frail conversations. The last one Azaria clearly remembered, Odessa's weak voice saying, "You just ask Darius, daughter. Let him decide when you should come." At the time, Azaria had taken it as traditional maternal deference. Now, looking back, she wondered if it had been something far darker, a veiled plea for help she had failed to recognize. 3 months ago, something had happened that planted the first real seed of doubt. Darius had come home very late from another supposed trip to the construction site. Azaria had been waiting up in the hallway. On his timberland boots, she noticed thick clumps of fresh, moist reddish clay clinging stubbornly to the deep treads. It was the dead of winter, 10 degrees below zero. The ground outside was frozen solid 3 feet down. "Darius," she had asked quietly, pointing at the dirty tracks on the rug, "where did this clay come from?" "Everything outside is frozen rock hard." He had frozen in the doorway for a split second before answering, too fast, words tumbling over each other. "Oh, that was over at my buddy Leroy's place. His lot's right next to Mama's. He needed help. Digging a foundation pit for a shed. That's where the mud came from." Digging a foundation pit in this weather? Azaria had pressed, incredulous. In the middle of winter? For the first time in their marriage, Darius had raised his voice, almost shouting. "What is this, an interrogation? I'm out there killing, myself trying to fix up a decent home. For my mother, so she can live her last years in comfort instead of a falling down shack, and you're throwing accusations at me? You should be ashamed." That night, Azaria had lain awake for hours, tears soaking her pillow. She wasn't crying over the harsh words. She was crying because, for the first time, she felt in her gut that her husband was lying to her, boldly, deliberately, about something deeply important, connected to that house in Cedar Grove. The next day, Darius had tried to smooth things over. He brought home diamond stud earrings from a boutique on the Magnificent Mile and took her to an expensive steakhouse where one entree cost more than her old weekly salary as a nurse. Azaria accepted the gifts with a pale, forced smile. Something inside her had cracked. She was no longer the trusting, naive wife. She began watching him more closely, studying his gestures, his habits, searching for clues to whatever secret he was guarding so fiercely. And then, in the last raw days of March, when winter refused to loosen its grip, everything changed forever. The last days of March dragged on like an endless frozen dusk. Chicago refused to release its grip on winter, and the wind howled through the high-rise canyons of the city with a bitterness that seeped into the bones. Inside the Aurora Heights apartment, the central heating hummed steadily, but Azaria still felt cold, deep, internal cold that no blanket or hot tea could chase away. Darius moved through their routine with practiced ease, early mornings at the gym, long days at the office, evenings scrolling through sports highlights or planning their next vacation. He spoke of summer trips to Jamaica or Cancun, of upgrading the condo's kitchen backsplash, of maybe starting to think about children in a year or two. His voice was warm, his touch affectionate. To any observer, he was the ideal husband, successful, attentive, proud of his beautiful wife. But Azaria watched him now with different eyes. She noticed how his smile never quite reach the depths of his gaze when he spoke of Cedar Grove. She noticed how quickly he changed the subject. Whenever Miss Clementine's name came up in passing, she noticed the way his phone buzzed late at night, how he angled the screen away from her as he typed rapid replies, a small private smile playing on his lips. She told herself she was being paranoid. 7 years of marriage didn't dissolve overnight because of one raised voice and a pair of muddy boots. Yet the splinter was festering. Saturday morning arrived quiet and ordinary. Azaria stood in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, kneading dough for her signature peach cobbler. The scent of cinnamon and ripening peaches filled the air. Darius adored the dessert. It was one of the few dishes from her grandmother's recipe book that she still made regularly. From the living room came the excited shouts of a basketball commentator. Darius was watching a replay of the previous night's Bulls game. Feet propped on the ottoman, coffee mug balanced on his stomach. The intercom buzzed sharply, slicing through the domestic calm. "Who the hell is that on a Saturday morning?" Darius called out, irritation lacing his voice. "It's our day off, man." Azaria wiped flour from her, hands onto her apron, and walked to the small screen by the door. A well-dressed older man stood in the lobby, expensive wool overcoat, leather briefcase, silver hair neatly combed. He looked directly into the camera. "Good afternoon," he said politely when she pressed the speak button. "I'm here to see Mr. Darius Vance on an urgent personal matter. My name is Langston Pierce. I'm an attorney with Pierce & Associates." Azaria's stomach tightened. She buzzed him up. Minutes later, the lawyer sat in their sunlit living room, perched on the edge of a cream-colored armchair. Darius sat opposite on the leather sofa, posture rigid, hands clasped tightly between his knees. Azaria hovered near the doorway, a tray of teacups trembling slightly in her hands. "I must apologize for disturbing you on the weekend," Mr. Pierce began, adjusting wire-rimmed glasses. His voice was measured, professional, but carried an unmistakable weight. "Unfortunately, the matter cannot be delayed." He opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick manila folder. "A month ago, a neighbor of Mrs. Odessa May Vance, Miss Clementine Howard, contacted my office. She had grown concerned about Mrs. Vance's prolonged absence and asked me to investigate through official channels." Azaria felt the floor tilt beneath her. The tray rattled louder. Mr. Pierce continued, eyes moving between husband and wife. "I'm afraid I bring sad news. Odessa May Vance passed away 32 days ago in the intensive care unit of the county hospital in Cedar Grove. The official cause of death was acute renal failure secondary to chronic kidney disease. I offer my deepest condolences." The words landed like stones in still water. Darius dropped his face into his hands. His broad shoulders began to shake. Muffled sobs escaped him, raw, guttural sounds that filled the room. Azaria stood frozen. The tray stopped trembling only because her grip had gone numb. 32 days. Over a month. Her mother-in-law had been gone for more than a month. And she, Azaria, had known nothing, had not attended the funeral, had not laid flowers on the grave, had not even been told. "Why?" The words slipped from her lips, barely a whisper. "Why didn't you tell me, Darius?" He lifted his head. Tears streaked his cheeks. His eyes were red-rimmed. I couldn't. I didn't know how. I didn't want to upset you needlessly, baby. You've been so stressed with everything." "A month?" Azaria repeated, voice rising. "A whole month has passed. She was buried without me, without her daughter-in-law." Mr. Pierce cleared his throat gently. "There is also the matter of the estate." He withdrew a brown envelope and a small ring of old-fashioned keys from the folder. "These are the property records and the keys to the house on Pine Street in Cedar Grove, according to Mrs. Vance's last valid will, filed 7 years ago. All real property passes to her son, Darius Vance, as sole heir of the first order." Darius accepted the envelope with shaking hands, still sniffling. The lawyer rose. "Again, I'm very sorry for your loss. If you have any questions about probate or the transfer of title, my office is at your disposal." As soon as the door closed behind him, Azaria turned on her husband. "You knew," she said, voice low and trembling with rage. "You knew she was gone and you said nothing. Not one word." Darius stood, wiping his face with the sleeve of his hoodie. "Zari, please. I was going to tell you, I couldn't find the right time." "The right time?" She laughed, a sharp, broken sound. "There is no right time to hide your mother's death." He stepped toward her, arms open as if to embrace her, but she backed away. 3 months ago, she continued, voice gaining strength, you came home with fresh clay on your boots in the middle of winter. You said you were helping Leroy dig a foundation, but she was already sick then, wasn't she? You were going out there seeing her, taking her to appointments, and you never told me. I didn't want to worry you. Darius snapped, his own voice rising now. She was failing fast, emaciated. It was ugly. I didn't want you to see her like that. And when she died, that was to spare me too? He turned away, pacing toward the window. I was ashamed, all right? Ashamed of how run down everything was. The house was a mess. She looked terrible. I didn't want you remembering her that way. Azaria stared at his back, at the tense line of his shoulders. The grief he had shown the lawyer had been convincing, Oscar-worthy even. But now, alone with her, something else flickered in his posture. Not just sorrow, but anxiety. Fear. He grabbed the envelope, with the keys from the coffee table, and strode toward his home office. Where are you going? She demanded. I need to be alone for a minute, he muttered, disappearing down the hallway. She heard the office door close, then the sharp click of the lock. Azaria stood in the middle of the living room, chest heaving. The peach cobbler dough sat forgotten on the counter, slowly drying out. The next 4 days passed in a haze of strained silence. Darius played the role of grieving son to perfection. He sat for hours in front of the darkened television, staring at nothing. He barely ate. He spoke in hushed, broken sentences about funeral arrangements. He had apparently already handled alone. Small service. Church cemetery, simple headstone. When Azaria pressed for details, date of the funeral, who had attended, where exactly Odessa was buried, he grew vague, then irritated. I took care of everything, he repeated. You weren't supposed to have to deal with any of it. At night, he reached for her in bed, seeking comfort, but she turned away, claiming headaches or exhaustion. She lay awake listening to his, breathing even out into sleep while her own mind raced. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. On the 5th day, Wednesday, over a quiet breakfast of oatmeal and toast, Darius made an announcement. Zari, I've got to head out tomorrow. Emergency call from a site in North Dakota. Major accident on one of the rigs. Pipeline burst. They need someone with my experience to oversee repairs. I'll probably be gone 10 days, maybe 2 weeks if it gets complicated. Azaria stirred her oatmeal slowly, not looking up. Okay. He seemed to wait for more, tears, protests. Please not to leave her alone in her grief. But she offered nothing. You'll be all right here? He asked finally. I'll manage. He watched her for a long moment, then nodded and returned to his phone. All that day, Azaria observed him covertly as he packed. He moved with an almost cheerful efficiency, whistling softly, folding shirts and jeans with care. Several times his phone lit up with messages. Each time he angled it away from her, thumbs flying across the screen, a small secret smile tugging at his mouth. At 5 a.m. the next morning, Darius leaned over the bed to kiss her forehead. Azaria pretended to be asleep, pulling the blanket higher. His lips felt cool against her skin. The door closed softly behind him. His footsteps faded down the hallway. The elevator dinged, then silence. Azaria waited 10 full minutes, heart pounding, before throwing back the covers and leaping out of bed. She had a plan. It had formed slowly over the sleepless nights, crystallizing into sharp, decisive clarity. First, the office. Darius always kept it locked when he traveled, a habit he claimed was for security. But Azaria knew where he hid the small key to the desk drawer. In the pocket of his favorite work jeans, currently sitting in the laundry hamper. She retrieved it quickly, along with the spare key to the office door itself, tucked in the top drawer of the hallway dresser. Darius's overconfidence had always been his weakness. He never imagined she would dare search his private spaces. The office smelled of his cologne and leather. The desk was tidy as always. She inserted the tiny key into the bottom drawer and pulled. Inside lay the thick blue folder labeled House Renovation, Cedar Grove, and, beneath it, the brown envelope the lawyer had delivered, the one containing the house keys. Her fingers trembled as she opened the folder. She expected to find contractor estimates, building permits, invoices for labor and materials. Instead, there were only receipts, hundreds of them, neatly organized by date, going back years. Home Depot, Menards, Lowe's, bags of concrete mix, truckloads of sand and gravel, rebar, vinyl siding, insulation boards. drywall sheets, premium kitchen cabinets, high-end appliances, luxury bathroom fixtures. The totals were staggering. Over the years, nearly $400,000 spent, all supposedly on renovations. But there were no contracts, no permits, no photos of progress, no correspondence with builders. Just receipts, perfectly timed, once a month, like clockwork. Tucked between two thick stacks was a small handwritten note on pale pink paper. The handwriting was young, feminine, rounded letters, slight slant. She's out of pills again. Need to buy urgently. Azaria stared at the pronoun. She's not Mama, not Odessa. A cold finger traced down her spine. She slipped the keys into her coat pocket, closed the drawer, and locked the office behind her. An hour later, she was on a Greyhound bus headed south. Ticket purchased with cash withdrawn from an ATM across town. She left her phone powered on, charging on the nightstand at home. Let him track that if he wanted. Let him think she was still in Chicago, grieving quietly. The bus rumbled through the gray morning, past frozen fields and small towns dusted with old snow. Azaria stared out the window, the bunch of keys heavy in her pocket, the note's words echoing in her mind. She's out of pills again. Who was she? And what exactly had Darius been building all these years with nearly $500,000? The Greyhound bus pulled into the small Cedar Grove terminal with a hiss of brakes and a cloud of exhaust that hung in the cold air. Azaria stepped down onto the cracked pavement, clutching her overnight bag. The town was smaller than she had imagined, yet far from the neglected backwater Darius had always described. Main Street was lined with neat brick storefronts, a modern municipal building with a flag snapping in the wind, a freshly paved parking lot outside a small strip mall. Snowbanks lined the sidewalks, but the streets were clear, and a few people moved about their Saturday errands, nodding politely to one another. Azaria pulled her coat tighter and walked toward the only grocery store in sight, a brightly lit Save-A-Lot with a hand-painted sign advertising weekend specials. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of fresh bread. She grabbed a basket, pretending to browse, then approached the cashier, a full-figured woman with warm brown skin and a name tag that read Dolores. "Excuse me," Azaria said, keeping her voice casual. "I'm trying to find a relative's house." "Odessa Vance? I'm from Chicago, haven't been here in years." Dolores's face softened immediately, then clouded with sympathy. She set down the scanner and leaned closer. "Oh, sugar, I'm so sorry. Miss Odessa passed on more than a month ago. We buried her in the churchyard at Mount Zion. Sweet lady. Quiet but always kind. Never bothered nobody." Azaria nodded, letting the grief show on her face. Grief that was real, even if delayed. "Thank you. I just wanted to see the house. Pay my respects." Dolores gave directions without hesitation. "Go right past the post office, turn onto Pine Street. Third house on the right, green metal fence. Big lot, you can't miss it. Big lot." Not the crumbling shack Darius had painted in her mind for 7 years. Azaria thanked her and stepped back into the cold. Each step toward Pine Street felt heavier, as though the snow were pulling at her boots. When she turned the corner, her breath caught. There was no construction site, no scaffolding, no piles of lumber, no torn-up yards scarred by heavy machinery. Instead, a handsome 2-story colonial stood proudly behind a tall green metal fence. Light beige vinyl siding gleamed in the weak afternoon sun. Dark red architectural shingles capped a perfectly intact roof. Tall, energy-efficient windows reflected the bare branches of mature oaks. A wide driveway led to a 2-car garage with a new door. In the side yard, she glimpsed a glass greenhouse and neatly trimmed hydrangea bushes sleeping under a thin blanket of snow. It was beautiful, finished, expensive. Azaria stood frozen on the sidewalk, staring, years of lies crystallized in that single moment. "Hey, miss! You looking for somebody?" The voice came from the neighboring yard. An elderly woman in a colorful head wrap and heavy garden coat leaned on a rake, peering over a low wooden picket fence. Her eyes were sharp, curious. Azaria found her voice. I'm Azaria, Darius Vance's wife, Odessa's daughter-in-law." The woman's mouth fell open. The rake slipped from her hands and clattered to the frozen ground. "Darius's wife?" she repeated, voice rising. "Child, you don't say." She hurried to the gate, unlatching it with practiced speed. "I'm Clementine Howard, Miss Clementine to most folks. Been living next door to Odessa May for near 30 years. She paused, studying Azaria's face. "Lord, he told everybody in town his wife was dying. Stage 4 cancer, chemo. couldn't travel. We all felt so sorry for the man, rushing between a sick mama and a sick wife. Azaria felt the ground tilt. She gripped the cold metal gate to steady herself. He told you I was dying? Swore it, Miss Clementine said, lowering her voice. Said you were in oncology up in Chicago. No immune system left. Couldn't risk the cold or the drive. We pitied him something fierce. Azaria closed her eyes for a moment, letting the betrayal wash over her. Not only had Darius hidden the house and his mother, he had erased her entirely, turning her into a tragic, bedridden ghost. Miss Clementine, she said quietly, Darius always told me the house was under major renovation. Years of work, beams replaced, floors torn out, roof leaking. That's why I could never visit. The older woman snorted. Renovation? Child, they finished the outside work 5, maybe 6 years ago. New siding, new roof, new windows. After that, trucks came, sure, furniture trucks. Ashley Home Store, rooms to go, big appliance deliveries. Leather sofas, canopy beds, double-door refrigerators, 70-inch TVs, all carried inside. Azaria's heart began to pound. Furniture? And toys, Miss Clementine added, eyes narrowing. Boxes and boxes of children's toys. Tricycles, dolls, Lego sets, remote control cars. I asked Darius once what an old lady needed with all that. He said it was for charity, some orphanage in Chicago. Her voice dropped to a whisper. But those toys never left the house. I watched from my upstairs window. Everything went in. Nothing came out. Azaria felt nausea rise in her throat. There's more, Miss Clementine continued. About 2 years ago, Odessa changed. Before that, she was spry. Walked to the store, visited neighbors, came to Bible study. Then suddenly she stopped coming out. Not even to the porch. We'd knock, call out. Darius would come to the door and say, Mama's resting. Doctor says no visitors. Weak immunity. Then he put up that tall fence, you see. Said it was to block the wind. But it looked more like a prison wall to me. Prison, Azaria echoed faintly. Sometimes at night, Miss Clementine said, we'd hear voices. A young woman laughing. A child crying or playing. But Darius always had an explanation. TV too loud. Workers staying late, only there were no workers. The picture was forming, monstrous and clear. A second family, hidden in plain sight, inside his mother's house, funded by hundreds of thousands of dollars meant for renovations. Azaria pulled the ring of keys from her pocket. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped them. I have the keys, she said. I'm going inside. Miss Clementine nodded. You do that, baby. I'll be right here. My husband Earl's home. He's old, but he's still strong. You holler if you need anything. The front door opened smoothly, hinges well-oiled, no creak at all. A wave of warm, almost hot air greeted her, along with the cloying scent of alpine meadow air freshener mixed with bleach and something faintly medicinal. The interior stunned her. Gleaming oak-look laminate floors stretched through a spacious, open-plan living room. A massive chocolate-brown leather sectional dominated the space, facing a television that covered half the wall. A glass coffee table sparkled under recessed lighting. Everything was high-end, meticulously clean, but it was the walls that stopped her breath. From floor to ceiling, framed photographs celebrated one man, Darius. Darius in front of the pyramids in Egypt. Darius on a ski slope in Aspen or Vale. Darius holding an enormous pike beside a river. Darius leaning against a gleaming black Cadillac Escalade. Dozens of images, vacations, trophies, luxury, everyone centered on him. There was not a single photograph of Odessa May. Not one of Azaria, not one of their wedding day. Their 7 years together had been erased as thoroughly as if they had never existed. In the kitchen, she found custom cabinetry. Granite counters, premium stainless steel appliances. On the refrigerator door, held by a kitten-shaped magnet, hung a child's drawing. 3 stick figures holding hands under a yellow sun. Above the tallest figure, clearly male, uneven letters spelled D-A-D-D-Y. Daddy. Azaria's knees weakened. She moved down the hallway like a ghost, trying doors until she reached the last one at the end. It was heavy, solid core, locked with a deadbolt. The smallest key on the ring slid in perfectly. The lock turned with a loud click that echoed in the silent house. The smell hit her first, thick. Concentrated, antiseptic, medication, illness long embedded in the walls. Heavy blackout curtains blocked every ray of daylight. In the dimness, she made out a hospital bed with raised metal rails, an IV stand, an oxygen concentrator humming quietly in the corner. On the bedside table, rows of pill bottles, syringes, adult diapers, underpads. This was where they had kept Odessa, locked away, imprisoned in her own home. But only half the room was a sick room. The opposite wall, directly facing the foot of the bed, so the occupant would see it every waking moment, was covered in cheerful blue wallpaper printed with teddy bears. Bright frames held family photographs, Darius embracing a beautiful young, light-skinned woman with long braids, no more than 25. The same woman holding a toddler boy who was the spitting image of Darius, same eyes, same smile, same mole on the neck, the three of them at a water park, the child shrieking with joy on Darius's shoulders, at a birthday party, blowing out candles, on this very leather sofa in the living room, posing as the perfect nuclear family. And the worst, a large portrait taken right here in this room. Darius, the young woman, and the little boy beaming at the camera, while behind them, propped in the hospital bed like a macabre prop, lay Odessa May, gaunt, hollow-eyed, staring into nothingness. Azaria sank to the floor, back against the wall. A silent scream trapped in her chest. Everything clicked into place with horrifying precision. There had never been a renovation. The hundreds of thousands of dollars had furnished a secret second life. Odessa had been locked away, forced to watch her son's new family flourish while she wasted away. With trembling hands, Azaria opened the bedside table drawer. Beneath medical supplies lay a worn composition notebook, a diary. The first entries, dated 3 years earlier, were written in neat elderly handwriting. Darius says he's starting a big renovation so I can live my last years in comfort. Lord bless him for his care. What a good son I raised. Months later. The house is beautiful now. Too luxurious for an old woman. But Darius says don't go out alone, might fall. I obey my son. Then the handwriting grew shaky. Darius brought a young woman named Sienna. Says she's a colleague needing temporary housing. Polite girl. Then she had a little boy, Mateo. Says it's a friend's child he's watching. But the boy has Darius's eyes exactly, and the same mole. I'm not blind. Later. Asked Darius straight if Mateo is his. He shouted, called me senile. Now he locks my door from outside, so I don't wander at night. The entries grew increasingly uneven. Heart pills ran out. Darius took the prescription, said he'd refill. Brought different white pills. They make me worse. Hard to breathe. Near the end, barely legible scrawls. Sienna cries sometimes. Says she wants to leave, but he won't let her. Notary came. Darius wants power of attorney over everything. I refused. He threatened Aria. Said accident could happen to her in city. Lord forgive me, I'm afraid. The final page. He is no longer my son. A demon lives in him. He has another woman and child here while I die alone. Aria, baby, if you ever read this, forgive me for not reaching you. Punish him. Don't let him win. Help me. Azaria pressed the notebook to her chest and wept. Silent, heaving sobs that shook her entire body. When she could breathe again, she stood on unsteady legs, slipped the diary into her bag, and walked out of the prison room. She locked the door behind her out of habit, then left the house entirely. Miss Clementine was waiting at the gate. You all right, child? Azaria shook her head. I need to call the lawyer, Mr. Pierce. Miss Clementine led her next door without another word. In the warm kitchen, smelling of sweet potato pie, Azaria dialed the number from the business card. Mr. Pierce listened in silence as she told him everything. The finished house, the second family, the locked room, the diary. Only occasional sharp intakes of breath interrupted her. Finally he spoke, voice grave. Mrs. Vance, your husband told my office you were undergoing cancer treatment. I see now that was a lie. Odessa did contact me 2 months ago from the hospital. She wanted to change her will, leave everything to you. Said you were the only person she trusted, even though she barely knew you. I began preparing documents. Then Darius arrived, claimed she had advanced dementia, wasn't competent. 3 weeks later she was dead. Kidney. Failure due to improper medication management. He killed her, Azaria whispered. Maybe not with his hands, but he killed her. Don't contact police yet, Pierce cautioned. He's clever. We need to move carefully. I have a detective friend with the district attorney's office. We'll come to you. Miss Clementine, who had listened to every word, spoke up. And Darius ain't in North Dakota. He's got another house, Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. I saw papers once when I delivered mail. Fancy new development. Azaria nodded slowly. The net was closing. She hung up and sat at Miss Clementine's table, clutching a cup of tea that went cold untouched, rereading Odessa's final plea. Punish him. Don't let him win. Outside, the short winter afternoon faded to dusk. Soon, justice would come calling. The wait felt eternal. Azaria sat at Miss Clementine's sturdy oak kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea that had long gone cold. The elderly woman moved quietly around her, wiping already clean counters, checking the sweet potato pies cooling on the rack, occasionally patting Azaria's shoulder with a comforting hand. Outside, the short winter day surrendered to twilight. Streetlights flickered on along Pine Street, casting pale pools of light on the thinning snow. Every few minutes, Azaria pulled Odessa's composition notebook from her bag and opened it to the last pages. The trembling scrawls seemed to burn into her eyes. He is no longer my son. A demon has possessed him. Aria, baby, if you ever read this, punish him. Don't let him win. Help me. She traced the words with her fingertip, as if touching them could reach back, through time and comfort the dying. Woman who had written them. At last, headlights swept across the lace curtains. 2 vehicles pulled up in front of the house next door, a dark sedan and an unmarked SUV. 4 figures emerged: Attorney Langston, Pierce in his familiar wool coat, 2 plainclothes detectives, one older with graying temples, the other younger and broad-shouldered, and a uniformed deputy who stayed by the cars. Miss Clementine opened her door before they could knock. Come in, come in. It's freezing out there." The men entered, stamping snow from their boots. Pierce made quick introductions. "Mrs. Vance, this is Detective Andre. Miller and Detective Ryan Torres from the district. Attorneys Special Investigations Unit. They specialize in elder abuse and financial exploitation cases." Azaria stood, extending a hand that still trembled slightly. "Thank you for coming so quickly." Miller, the older detective, gave a small nod. Mr. Pierce briefed us on the drive. The diary, the locked room, the second family, the medication tampering, those are very serious allegations. "If what you've described checks out, we have more than enough for an arrest." Torres added, "We ran a quick records check on the way here. There's a property in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, registered to a Shell LLC. The mailing address traces back to a P.O. box used by your husband. Utility bills are in his name. Satellite imagery shows a new build in a gated community. Matches the description Miss Howard gave." Miss Clementine spoke up. "It's about an hour and a half north of here. Fancy place, big houses, private beach on the lake. Folks up there mind their own business." Pierce laid a folder on the table. "We need to move tonight. If Darius suspects anything, he could flee, destroy evidence, or worse. The element of surprise is critical." Azaria nodded. "I'm coming with you." The men exchanged glances. Miller hesitated. "Ma'am, it could get unpredictable." "I'm coming," she repeated, voice steady for the first time in days. "He needs to see my face when the truth hits him." After a beat, Miller relented. "You ride with us. You stay in the vehicle until we have him in custody. No exceptions." They left Cedar Grove under cover of darkness, the 2 vehicles traveling in tandem along winding county roads that eventually merged onto the interstate. Snow flurries danced in the headlights. Azaria sat in the back seat of the SUV beside Pierce, Odessa's diary clutched in her lap like a talisman. No one spoke much. The detectives murmured occasionally over the radio, confirming jurisdiction with Wisconsin authorities, a courtesy heads up. Nothing more. The arrest would happen before local police were looped in. Azaria's mind raced through the years. The diamond earrings after the clay boots argument. The lavish dinners, the whispered promises of children. Someday. Every memory now carried the sour taste of manipulation. How long had he been living this double life? Since before the wedding? During their honeymoon, had he been texting Sienna, checking on the boy? The gated community in Lake Geneva appeared suddenly, a cluster of modern, timber and glass homes glowing warmly against the frozen lake. Security at the entrance gate was light. The guard barely glanced at the detectives' badges before waving them through. The house was exactly as Miss Clementine had described. Sleek lines, expansive windows, a 3-car garage. Warm light spilled from every room. In the front yard, fresh snow had been sculpted into a lopsided snowman with a carrot nose and a child's knitted scarf. A bright plastic sled leaned against the porch steps. Nearby, a small snow fort stood half-built, tiny boot prints crisscrossing the yard. A picture-perfect family scene. Darius was outside, bundled in a shearling coat, pulling a laughing little boy on the sled along a cleared path. The child, Mateo, Azaria realized with a jolt, shrieked, with delight each time the sled bumped over a ridge. On the wide porch, the young woman from the photographs stood watching them, wrapped in a blanket, steam rising from a mug in her hands. She smiled down at the pair, her face soft with affection. Ideal, idyllic, built on lies and a dying woman's suffering. Detective Miller parked at the curb. The second vehicle pulled in behind. Engines cut, doors opened quietly. Azaria stepped out first, boots crunching loudly on the packed snow. The sound carried in the still night air. Darius turned, grinning at first, expecting perhaps a neighbor or delivery. The grin froze when he saw her, his face drained of color, eyes widening in raw shock. "Aria?" The name escaped him like a gasp. The woman on the porch, Sienna, tilted her head, squinting into the darkness. "Darius, baby, who's that?" Azaria walked forward slowly, deliberately, until she stood at the edge of the yard. Snowflakes caught in her hair. "I'm his wife," she said, voice clear and steady. "Azaria Vance, lawfully married for 7 years." Sienna staggered back a step, the mug slipping from her fingers. It shattered on the wooden steps, hot liquid steaming on the cold planks. "What?" she whispered. "But you said—" "You swore she died 3 years ago, cancer." Azaria met her eyes. "As you can see, I'm alive, perfectly healthy. Unlike Odessa May, whom your man starved of proper medication and locked away until she died. So he could have this." She reached into her bag and pulled out the diary, holding it up. Darius let go of the sled rope. Mateo tumbled gently into a snowbank, giggling, oblivious. "Aria, listen!" Darius started, hands raised placatingly. "No," she cut him off. "You listen." Behind her, the detectives approached the low gate. "Darius Vance," Detective Miller called out. Badge raised. "I'm Detective Miller, District Attorney's Office. We have reason to believe you're involved in the abuse and death of Odessa May Vance, along with fraud and related charges. Come with us peacefully." Darius backed away, boots slipping on the path. "This is private property. You can't just—" "We can," Torres said calmly, opening the gate. "We have probable cause. Don't make this harder." Sienna sank to her knees in the snow, pulling Mateo against her as the boy began to whimper, sensing the shift in mood. Darius's gaze darted wildly, yard, driveway, lake beyond, searching for escape. Finding none, he turned back to Azaria, eyes blazing with a mixture of fear and fury. "You ruined everything," he hissed. "Everything I built." "You ruined it yourself," she replied, voice ice cold. "You ruined your mother's life, mine, theirs." She nodded toward Sienna and the frightened child. "And now you'll pay for all of it." Miller and Torres moved in, cuffs ready. Darius didn't resist, perhaps realizing it was futile. The metal clicked around his wrists with a sharp, final sound. As they led him past her toward the SUV, he leaned close, voice low and venomous. "This isn't over, Zari. You think you've won." "I'll be out in—" She stopped him with a look. "Save it for your lawyer, Darius. Or better yet, save it for the judge." They placed him in the back of the sedan. Sienna remained on the porch steps, rocking Mateo, tears streaming down her face as she watched the father of her child taken away. Detective Miller approached her gently. "Ma'am, we'll need to speak with you too. You're not under arrest, but your statement will be crucial." Sienna nodded numbly. I didn't know about her," she whispered, glancing at Azaria. "He told me his wife died years ago, that his mother was sick but well cared for. I swear I didn't know." Azaria believed her. The shock on Sienna's face was too raw to be acting. "I know," Azaria said quietly. "He lied to both of us." The detective secured the Lake Geneva house, sealing doors, posting a deputy overnight to preserve evidence. Computers, phones, financial records, everything would be seized in the morning under warrant. Azaria rode back to Cedar Grove with Pierce and Miller. The return trip felt shorter, the weight in her chest lighter with each mile. At Miss Clementine's, the older woman had kept the porch light on and a fresh pie warming in the oven. "You hungry, baby?" she asked, wrapping Azaria in a flour-dusted hug. "Not yet," Azaria admitted, "but I'll sit with you a while." They sat up late into the night, 3 unlikely allies around the kitchen table. Pierce outlined next steps: charges, arraignment, discovery. Miller explained how Sienna's testimony could seal the case if she cooperated fully. "From what we saw tonight," Miller said, "she'll cooperate. That woman looked like her whole world just collapsed." Before dawn, Azaria walked next door to the Pine Street house alone. She let herself in with the keys that were now rightfully hers. Keys Odessa had wanted her to have. She went straight to the locked bedroom, opened the curtains for the first time in years. Moonlight spilled across the hospital bed, the teddy bear wallpaper, the gallery of stolen happiness. She stood in the center of the room and spoke aloud to the empty air. "I heard you, Mama Odessa. I came as soon as I could. He won't hurt anyone else. I promise you that." Tears fell, but they were different now. Tears of release, of purpose. Outside, the first pale hint of morning touched the sky. Justice had only begun, but the longest night was over. A year later, the short but glorious Midwest summer settled over Cedar Grove like a warm blessing. The air carried the sweet scent of blooming peonies and fresh-cut grass. Children's laughter echoed down Pine Street as they biked past on their way to the community pool. The town felt alive in a way it hadn't during the long winter of secrets and grief. The house that had once been a prison now stood open and welcoming. The tall, solid green metal fence was gone, torn down within weeks of the trial's end. In its place rose a low, white wooden picket fence, the kind that invited neighbors to lean over and chat. Lush flower beds burst with zinnias, marigolds, and black-eyed Susans. Hydrangeas that Odessa had planted decades ago bloomed bigger and bluer than ever, as if relieved of their burden. Azaria Vance knelt in the front yard in a light sundress, watering the flowers from a green hose. Her skin glowed with sun and purposeful work. She had cut her hair, shorter, practical for the heat, and the new style framed her face with soft curls that bounced when she moved. She looked younger, lighter, as though the weight of 7 years of deception had finally lifted. The front door stood propped open. Inside, the house had been transformed beyond recognition. Gone were the ostentatious leather sectional, the massive wall-mounted TV, the glass and chrome tables. Gone were the hundreds of narcissistic photographs of Darius. Azaria had built a bonfire in the backyard the week after the sentencing and burned every last one, along with stacks of forged receipts and fake renovation documents. The flames had risen high that night, carrying away the lies in sparks and ash. In their place, the walls now held watercolor landscapes painted by local artists, embroidered samplers from church ladies, and dozens of framed children's drawings, bright, joyful explosions of crayon and imagination. The kitchen had been repainted a sunny yellow. A long farmhouse table replaced the cold formal dining set, its surface already scarred with the happy marks of shared meals. Jars of homemade peach preserves and Miss Clementine's sweet potato. Butter lined the open shelves. But the biggest change was the room at the end of the hallway, the one that had once been Odessa's locked prison. The hospital bed was long gone, hauled to the dump without ceremony. The heavy blackout curtains had been replaced with sheer white tulle that let sunlight pour in. The walls, stripped of their mocking teddy bear wallpaper and cruel family portraits, were now a warm peach color that seemed to hold the light. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 3 walls, filled with donated books of every kind. Picture books for little ones, chapter books for middle graders, young adult novels, classics, biographies, poetry. Soft beanbag chairs in bright colors dotted a thick geometric patterned rug. A long table held art supplies, colored pencils, markers, construction paper, glue sticks. This was now the Odessa May Vance Community Library. A simple wooden plaque hung beside the door, the letters burned in by a local craftsman. The Odessa May Vance Community Library. Read and you shall be free. Every afternoon after school, children poured in. They sprawled on the rug, reading aloud to one another, worked on homework at the table, or simply sat quietly lost in a story. Azaria kept a perpetual supply of homemade cookies and lemonade ready. She read to the younger ones, helped the older ones with book reports, and listened to their chatter with a patience she hadn't known she possessed. She had decided not to return to Chicago. The Aurora Heights condo, paid off with Darius's money, had been sold. The proceeds funded the library's startup and a scholarship in Odessa's name for local high school seniors, pursuing nursing or teaching. Azaria herself stayed in Cedar Grove, living in the house that Odessa had wanted her to have. It felt like the only way to honor the woman who had reached out from her deathbed with a final, desperate plea. Some nights when the house was quiet, Azaria still felt Odessa's presence, not as a ghost, but as a quiet approval. The air felt lighter. The rooms felt loved. "Azaria, You gonna mess with those flowers all day or come get some tea? Miss Clementine's voice carried from the gate, warm and teasing. She held a plate covered with foil, golden sweet potato pies fresh from the oven. Coming, Auntie Clem, Azaria called back, smiling as she coiled the hose. Just finishing the asters. She wiped her hands on her dress and walked to the gate. Miss Clementine had become family in the truest sense. Daily visits, shared meals, long evenings on the porch swing talking about everything and nothing. Inside the library, children's voices drifted out through the open windows. A group of middle schoolers was reading Roll of Thunder. Hear My Cry aloud, taking turns with the chapters. Their young voices rose and fell with the drama of the story. Azaria paused on the porch to listen, eyes closing for a moment. She had done it. She had fulfilled Odessa's last wish. Darius Vance was gone, serving 12 years in a downstate correctional facility. The trial had been the talk of the county for months. Front-page headlines in the Chicago Tribune and local papers screamed the details. Sunlock's mother in bedroom. Withholds medication for inheritance. Odessa's diary, authenticated by handwriting experts, became the prosecution's unbreakable evidence. Sienna had testified fully, tears streaming as she described how Darius dismissed his mother's pleas for proper medication, replacing prescriptions with cheap vitamins, how he threatened both women in different ways, how he used Azaria's name as a weapon, signed the power of attorney. Mama, or something bad might happen to my wife in the city. The defense team, paid for with money the court later seized, tried to paint Darius as a stressed caregiver making difficult choices. But the jury saw through the performance. 12 years, no possibility of early parole. All properties obtained through fraud were awarded to Azaria as Odessa's intended heir. Sienna and Mateo had moved away to her parents' home in Milwaukee. Azaria harbored no anger toward her. The young woman had been another victim of Darius's lies. Before leaving, Sienna had come to the house one afternoon, eyes swollen from crying. I didn't know, she'd whispered. I swear on my son's life. I didn't know about you or what he was doing to his mama. If I'd known, I'd have called someone. I promise. Azaria had believed her. They'd embraced awkwardly on the porch, two women bound by the same betrayal. Now, sitting at Miss Clementine's kitchen table with a slice of warm pie and a glass of iced tea, Azaria felt something she hadn't in years. Peace. You look good, baby, Miss Clementine said, studying her over the rim of her glasses. Real good. Like you finally home. I am home, Azaria replied softly. This is where I was supposed to be all along. With her. Miss Clementine reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Odessa watching down. She proud of you. Turning her pain into all this good? That's redemption, child. Pure redemption. That evening, after the last child had bicycled away and the library lights were turned off, Azaria walked through the house one last time before bed. She paused in the library doorway, running her fingers over the wooden plaque. Read and you shall be free. Odessa had been trapped, physically, emotionally, fatally. But her words, preserved in that frayed composition notebook, had broken the chains for others. Every child who walked through these doors carrying a library card carried a piece of her liberation. Azaria turned off the lights and stepped onto the back porch. The summer night was thick with the song of crickets and the scent of night-blooming jasmine. Fireflies danced over the lawn like tiny lanterns. She lifted her face to the stars. I did it, Mama Odessa, she whispered. He didn't win. You're free now, and so am I. A soft breeze stirred the leaves, as gentle as a mother's hand stroking a daughter's back. Azaria smiled, went inside, and closed the door, not with a lock, but with the quiet certainty of a woman who had finally found her place. The house on Pine Street stood bathed in moonlight, its windows glowing warmly, a beacon of healing in a town that had once harbored terrible secrets. And inside its walls, stories, hundreds of them, waited, on shelves for young minds to open them and step into. Worlds where courage always won, where justice prevailed, where love, in the end, outlasted every lie, just as it had here.